Welcome to the new episode of History of Revolution. How are you? Hope your week was fine. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into some foundational stuff. We're looking at a moment, a huge moment in the history of socialism.
That's right. We're talking about the turn of the 20th century. It was this critical crossroads for organized Marxism.
Yeah, exactly. This fork in the road. Stick to the plan, immediate revolution, capitalism collapsing.
Or adapt. Go for gradual change, work within the democratic system that was, well, starting to emerge more strongly in some places.
It's a fundamental tension, isn't it? And it's really key for anyone new to world history, or Marxism specifically, to understand this split. It helps explain so much that came later.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to trace that divergence. On one side, you've got the revolutionary theory, the idea that capitalism has to collapse, probably violently.
On the other.
The political reality. Socialists were actually gaining ground, winning seats in parliament, building powerful trade unions. They were becoming a real force within the existing system.
So what sources are we digging into for this?
We've got some really core documents. We'll start with the manifesto of the International Socialist Congress at Basel. That really sets the baseline, the revolutionary consensus, particularly on war.
Okay. And then?
Then we plunge into the big one, the Revisionist Debate. We'll be looking closely at the arguments of Edward Bernstein. He's the key figure challenging the old ways.
And the people pushing back against him.
Exactly. Figures like Rosa Luxemburg and Trotsky defending the orthodox Marxist position is a real intellectual battle.
Yeah.
So to really get this, you have to understand the Second International first. This wasn't just a small group. It was this huge global federation of socialist parties, labor movements, founded back in 1889.
And its core idea.
Proletarian internationalism. Simple but powerful. Workers in Germany, France, Britain, wherever. They had more in common with each other than with their own bosses or kings.
Workers have no country, right?
That's the line. Your true enemy isn't the worker across the border. It's the capitalist class, the state that backs them up. Unity across borders against the ruling class.
And wow, nothing would test that unity like the threat of a major European war, which was looming large back then.
Precisely. And the Basel Manifesto gives us a crystal clear picture of where they stood. They didn't mince words. War was fundamentally against humanity and reason.
Not just bad, but irrational from the people's perspective.
Completely. They said it couldn't be justified by even the slightest pretext of being in the interest of the people. It was seen purely as a conflict driven by ruling class interests, competition, markets, colonies.
But it wasn't just about saying war is bad, was it? There was a strategy.
Oh, absolutely. It was a pre-planned revolutionary response. The manifesto lays out this threefold duty for the working class if war did break out, despite their efforts to stop it.
Okay, what were the three parts?
First, intervene immediately to push for a speedy termination. Stop the fighting as quickly as possible.
Makes sense. Second,
use the chaos. Utilize the economic and political crisis that war always creates to stir up the masses, to raise consciousness.
so see the crisis as an opportunity.
Exactly. Which leads to the third point. The ultimate goal was to use that mass mobilization to hasten the downfall of capitalist class rule, turn the imperialist war into a revolutionary situation.
So it's incredibly strategic. War is a disaster, but if it happens, it's the trigger for the final push against capitalism itself.
That's the core idea. They saw it as the moment the system's contradictions would be laid bare, the moment workers could finally overthrow it.
And the manifesto connects this drive towards war directly to capitalism's internal dynamics, right?
Yes, very clearly. They talk about the universal craze for armaments. This arms race wasn't just dangerous geopolitically, it hit workers directly at home.
How so?
Well, think about it. Massive spending on armies and navies means higher taxes, higher cost of living. Money poured into weapons isn't being spent on schools or healthcare or better wages.
So it directly fuels discontent.
Right. It intensifies class antagonisms. The ruling class, by preparing for war, was simultaneously creating an implacable spirit of revolt among its own population. They were, in a way, digging their own graves.
And they weren't just talking abstractly. They pointed to specific hotspots, like the Balkans.
Yes, the Balkan crisis was a major focus. But crucially, they didn't blame the Balkan peoples.
Who did they blame?
The great powers of Europe. They argued these major powers were deliberately blocking reforms in places like the Ottoman Empire, creating unbearable economic, national, and political conditions to serve their own imperial interests. stirring the pot for their own gain.
And the socialist solution.
A democratic federation of the Balkan peoples themselves. Let them sort out their own future, free from outside interference by the big empires.
That sounds like a direct challenge to the empires.
It was, and it required real international solidarity within the Balkans, too. Socialists were urged to fight against nationalism in their own countries.
Fight the idea that, say, a Serbian worker should hate a Turkish worker.
Exactly. Resist the propaganda pushing them to war for the benefit of dynasties, by militarism, by the bourgeoisie, greedy for expansion. They had to insist on the fraternity of all Balkan peoples. Serbs, Bulgars, Romanians, Greeks, Albanians, Turks, all workers together.
That unity was their power then.
Immense power. And the ruling classes know it. There's a fascinating point here. The fear of a united working class actually turning a world war into a revolution served as an essential guarantee of peace.
So the threat of revolution actually helped prevent war for a time.
It seems so. The capitalists and generals hesitated because they feared the consequences at home more than they desired the spoils of war abroad. It shows the political weight the organized working class carried.
Did they propose any specific policies to diffuse the situation beyond just opposing war generally?
They did. They zeroed in on the main danger, the rivalry between Britain and Germany, the naval arms race, the economic competition.
The two industrial giants heading for collision.
Right. And they proposed concrete steps. First, an agreement to limit naval arms spending, stop the battleship race.
Okay, seems straightforward.
And second, something really interesting, the abolition of the right of naval booty.
Naval booty, what's that exactly?
It was the long-standing right of warships to capture or sink enemy merchant ships during wartime and claim the cargo, or the ship itself, as plunder. It made naval warfare directly profitable for shipping interests and the state.
Ah, so attacking civilian trade was part of the prize.
Yes. Abolishing it would remove a major economic incentive for war, particularly for nations like Britain, that relied heavily on maritime trade. Make war less profitable for the capitalists, make it harder to justify.
Okay, so that's the Basel Manifesto, a strong, united, revolutionary front against war and capitalism. But, as you said, things started to shift. This leads us to the big split, the revisionist debate.
Yeah, the cracks started appearing, or rather became undeniable, around 1895. That's the year Friedrich Engels died.
Marx's collaborator, the kind of guardian of the orthodox flame.
Exactly. With Engels gone, the theoretical unity started to fray. There was room for questioning the established doctrines, especially within the biggest, most successful party, the German Social Democratic Party, the SPD.
And the main challenger was Edward Bernstein. Now, it's important to stress he wasn't some outsider, right?
Not at all. That's what made it so shocking. Bernstein was an eminent and orthodox Marxist. He'd edited the main party newspaper, Social Democrat, under persecution. He was even a key figure in drafting the Erfurt program just a few years earlier, in 1891.
And the Erfurt program was?
That was the official, canonical statement of SPD principles, pure Marxism. It affirmed the inevitability of capitalism's collapse, the need for revolution. Bernstein helped write that.
So for him to then turn around and question those very ideas,
Yeah.
That must have sent shockwaves.
Huge shockwaves. He started expressing doubts, questioning the core predictions, the fundamental doctrines. It wasn't really about the end goal, a socialist society, but about how to get there.
The means versus the end.
Precisely. Does the day-to-day struggle, the political action, the reforms, do those matter more than holding onto the idea of an eventual big revolutionary overthrow? That was the heart of it.
What drove his doubts? What was he seeing?
He was looking at the world around him, especially in the 1890s, a period of relative economic growth, and he basically said, look, Marx's predictions of inevitable collapse, of ever-increasing misery for the workers, they aren't quite panning out as expected.
Capitalism was proving more resilient.
That was his argument. He said capitalism showed an unforeseen ability to adapt. It wasn't rigidly marching towards doom.
Did he have specific examples?
Yeah, he pointed particularly to England. He observed that strong trade unions, through strikes and collective bargaining, had managed to win real gains for large sections of the working class.
Better wages, shorter hours.
Right. Their lives had significantly improved their lot, as the source puts it. It wasn't universal, but it was happening, incrementally, through struggle within the system.
So if workers' lives were improving, even slowly, where's the fuel for a revolution?
That's the revisionist conclusion. Bernstein argued that democracy itself, the gradual expansion of voting rights and parliamentary power, was paving a path towards socialism. Maybe a slower path, maybe a less dramatic one, but a path nonetheless. Less need for that violent rupture.
Okay, so that inevitably changes how you see the state, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, the traditional Marxist view, Engels' view, saw using parliament and elections as purely tactical. It was a way to build strength, spread propaganda, survive repression like Bismarck's anti-socialist laws. You participate to survive until the system collapses.
A temporary tool within a revolutionary strategy.
Exactly. But Bernstein looked at expanding democracy and argued the state itself was changing. It was becoming, in his view, more responsive to the common people. It was starting to shed its character as purely a tool of the narrow class interests of the capitalists.
He saw the state as something socialists could potentially capture and use for good gradually.
Sort of, yes. That through winning elections, passing reforms, the state could be transformed piece by piece into an instrument for socialist goals.
But the orthodox Marxists, like Trotsky and Luxemburg, they must have pushed back hard on that.
Oh, immediately and forcefully. Their counter-argument was crucial. The state's form might become democratic elections, parliament, whatever, but its essential content, its fundamental purpose, remains the same.
Which is?
To protect the interest of the dominant class, the capitalist class, to uphold private property and the whole system of exploitation.
So democracy is just a mask.
From their perspective, yes, or at least a tool the bourgeoisie uses when it suits them. They argued that the ruling class would happily use democratic institutions as long as those institutions don't seriously threaten their power or profits.
But what if they did threaten them? What if socialists won a huge majority democratically?
The orthodox prediction was clear. The moment democracy shows a tendency to renounce its class character, meaning the moment it actually starts implementing real socialist measures, like seizing property or industries, the bourgeoisie will drop the democratic facade in a heartbeat.
And then what?
Then they'd use the real power of the state, the army, the police, the courts, to crush the democratic movement. They believe the ruling class would resort to violence to protect its economic base, regardless of election results.
So for the orthodox, the state is inherently an instrument of class violence, and you can't just vote that away.
That's the core belief. You can use democratic means to build power, but ultimately, a confrontation with the state's repressive apparatus is unavoidable if you truly want to change the system.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into this idea Bernstein was challenging, the catastrophe theory. Can you break that down simply for someone new to this?
Sure. It's really central to classical Marxism, going back to the Communist Manifesto. It's the prediction that capitalism carries the seeds of its own destruction within it.
Because of its internal contradictions.
Exactly. Things like the inherent conflict between the owners of capital and the workers, a constant drive to produce more and more goods versus the limited ability of workers with their low wages to actually buy those goods.
Overproduction crises, underconsumption.
Right. And also the tendency Marx identified for the rate of profit to fall over the long term. All these internal pressures, the theory goes, build up inevitably until the system reaches a breaking point, a total collapse. A great world historical crisis.
And the revolution is the political consequence of that economic breakdown.
Yes, the system fails, creating the conditions for the working class to take power.
So Bernstein, looking around in the relatively prosperous 1890s, basically said, hold on, where's the catastrophe?
Pretty much. He looked at the data, the economic reality, and argued that this predicted collapse wasn't happening. He believed capitalism had developed counter-tendencies, ways to manage its contradictions.
Like what? What mechanisms did he see?
Things like the development of credit systems, which could help smooth out crises, the formation of cartels and trusts, which could regulate production and prices, avoiding chaotic competition to some extent, globalization, opening new markets.
So the system was adapting, finding ways to survive.
That was his point. And he used statistics to back it up, specifically Prussian industrial statistics. Marx had predicted that big companies would swallow up all the small and medium ones' concentration of capital.
The little guy gets wiped out.
Right. But Bernstein looked at the numbers and said, well, yes, large companies are growing, no doubt. But medium-sized businesses aren't disappearing entirely. There's still a significant number of them. He suggested it was more like coexistence, adaptation, not a simple death struggle leading to total monopoly.
The stats suggested a more complex picture than just big fish eating little fish until only one giant fish remains.
Exactly. He argued the system was evolving, not just collapsing. But of course, the orthodox Marxists weren't buying it. They came back hard, questioning not just his conclusions, but how he was even using the statistics.
How so?
Well, a key figure here was Parvis. He accused Bernstein of formalism.
Formalism, meaning
Mistaking the form for the reality. Looking at the surface appearance, the legal structure, and missing the underlying economic relationships.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Bernstein might look at the statistics and see, say, 100 small workshops listed as independent businesses. Formalism, Parvis argued, is just counting those labels.
Okay.
But the reality might be that 80 of those independent workshops are actually completely dependent on one huge factory or wholesaler. They're basically just agents, pieceworkers, or suppliers locked into exploitative contracts.
So legally they're independent, but economically they're effectively part of the larger capitalist machine still being exploited.
Precisely. Their legal form as independent was deceiving Bernstein about their actual economic content and subordination. Parvis was saying you need to look beyond the superficial labels at the real power dynamics.
That's a powerful critique of just relying on surface-level stats. What about Rosa Luxemburg? How did she respond?
Luxemburg tackled Bernstein's idea that capitalism had somehow overcome its tendency towards crisis. She had this brilliant, yet rather grim, argument that crises weren't actually a sign of capitalism failing.
They weren't. What were they then?
She argued they were essential to its functioning, like a forest fire clearing out dead wood. Crises, she said, were the means of constantly raking and fanning the fire of capitalist development.
How do they fan the fire?
Two main ways, according to Luxemburg. First, crises periodically depreciate capital. Bad investments get wiped out, inefficient companies go bankrupt. It's a brutal clearing out process.
Okay, destruction.
But that destruction makes room for the second function, new investment. After the crash, capital is cheaper, labor might be cheaper, there are opportunities for new technologies and more efficient production methods to come in. So crises, paradoxically, drive progress within capitalism.
So if crises stop, capitalism wouldn't thrive, it would stagnate.
That was her exact point.
Yeah.
Without crises to periodically destroy old value and force innovation, the system would get clogged up. It would be driven directly into the mire. Crises are the violent, destructive, but necessary engine of capitalist renewal.
Wow. So trying to fix crises is missing the point from her perspective.
Completely. Yeah. And then you had Karl Kautsky, who was sort of the leading theorist of orthodoxy after Engels. He took a slightly more, maybe pragmatic line.
How so?
He acknowledged that, yes, some adaptation was happening, capitalism was growing, but he insisted that the fundamental revolutionary trajectory, especially in a place like Germany, hadn't changed. The final crisis, the big one, was still coming.
He just didn't think it was imminent.
He stressed it wouldn't necessarily be provoked by the party itself trying to start something. It would be provoked either by the system's own internal limits or by the actions of the ruling class maybe launching a war or cracking down violently on the workers' movement.
So be ready.
Exactly. His message was, don't get complacent, don't get seduced by reforms. The party should have no illusions as to the inevitability of its occurrence. Prepare for the inevitable confrontation even while you engage in day-to-day struggles.
By the way, if you liked and interested so far, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It's really important for us to continue this series. This whole debate, theory versus reality, statistics, it really crystallized around one of Bernstein's most famous or infamous statements.
Yes. The movement is everything to me.
Because it bears its goal within itself. What exactly did he mean by that, and why did it cause such an uproar?
Well, on the surface, it sounds like he's saying the process, building unions, winning elections, getting reforms, is the goal. The day-to-day movement is what matters, not some distant, perhaps mythical, final goal of revolution.
Which, to the orthodox, sounded like...
Like completely abandoning the revolutionary objective, giving up on the idea of overthrowing capitalism and fundamentally changing society. If the movement is the goal, why ever risk it all in a revolution? Just keep moving incrementally.
Did Bernstein intend it that way?
He later clarified. He said he wasn't dismissing the ultimate aim, the emancipation of the working class. He claimed the phrase was aimed specifically against overly rigid utopian attempts to design the exact blueprint of the future socialist society in advance, against dogmatism about the final goal.
So, more about how you think about the future, less about abandoning the future itself.
That was his defense. But you can see how, in the heat of the debate at conferences like Stuttgart in 1898, it was seized upon as proof that revisionism meant sacrificing the revolutionary soul of the movement for short-term gains. It highlighted the practical danger. Does focusing only on reforms eventually make you forget why you wanted reforms in the first place?
Okay, so this huge internal debate about reform versus revolution slams right into the biggest global reality of that era, rampant imperialism and colonialism. How did that factor in?
It became a crucial test case. If socialism is about international solidarity and opposing exploitation, how do you deal with your own country conquering and exploiting people in Africa or Asia.
A real stress test for the principles.
Absolutely. And here, Bernstein's revisionist pragmatism took a particularly, well, controversial and frankly ugly turn, according to his critics.
What was his position?
According to Ernest Belfort Bax, a staunch orthodox Marxist who debated him fiercely, Bernstein seemed to suggest that socialists should basically only support colonial uprisings if they led to the spread of capitalist civilization, what he termed the höhere Kultur, the higher culture.
Wow. So some colonial subjects deserve support, others didn't, based on whether they were moving towards European-style capitalism.
And that's how Bax interpreted it. Bernstein apparently argued that bringing European administration and economy to places like Turkey was more urgent than ever before, implying it was a necessary progressive step, even if it involved conquest.
That sounds dangerously close to justifying imperialism as a civilizing mission.
Exactly what Bax accused him of. Bax hit back hard in the socialist press, like the paper Justice. He laid out the orthodox Marxist position unequivocally. It is the duty of every social democrat to resist each and every act of colonial policy. Full stop.
No ifs, ands, or buts. Why such a hard line? What was the core anti-capitalist reasoning?
Bax saw colonialism not as some historical necessity for progress, but as the one sheet anchor of the modern capitalist system. It was capitalism's lifeline, its survival mechanism.
A sheet anchor, meaning it stopped the system from sinking.
Precisely. He argued imperialism served two vital functions that were helping capitalism avoid the collapse Marx had predicted. It was counter-revolutionary at its core.
Okay, what were those two functions?
First, new markets and outlets. Capitalism constantly needs to expand to sell its goods and invest its profits. Colonies provided captive markets and cheap resources, helping overcome crises of overproduction back home.
So keep the engine running by expanding outwards.
Right. And second, maybe even more cynically, was the creation of a new reserve army of labor, meaning the colonized peoples. They could be subjected to intense exploitation, paid starvation wages, used to undercut the increasingly organized and demanding workers back in Europe. If workers in Britain or Germany got too rebellious, you could just rely more on hyper-exploited colonial labor to keep profits up.
So imperialism wasn't just about markets, it was about weakening the working class at home, too.
That was Bax's crucial anti-capitalist point. It was a strategy to divide and conquer the global proletariat, prolonging capitalism's dominance.
That puts Bernstein's higher culture argument in a very different light.
Completely. Bax dismissed it as hypocritical indignation and specious humanitarian twaddle, basically, a flimsy excuse for raw economic exploitation.
What did Bax see as the real outcome for colonized people?
He was brutally honest. He said colonization meant swapping the occasional brutalities of, say, local rulers like pashas for the general degradation as a proletariat under European capitalism. Constant systemic exploitation.
A bleak picture.
He painted a vivid one. A wasteland of boilers and chimney smoke, called Progress and Popular Well-Being, a total indictment of the civilizing mission idea.
So for the Orthodox, fighting imperialism wasn't just about abstract solidarity, it was about attacking capitalism's crucial escape valve.
Exactly. If you could stop colonial expansion, you'd hasten the internal crisis of capitalism. It was strategically essential.
Did Bernstein try to use Marx or Engels to support his view?
He apparently tried, suggesting they saw capitalism as a historically progressive force, but Bax shot that down too. He pointed out that Marx himself, in Capital, praised the North in the American Civil War for fighting slavery, calling it the only magnificent contemporary event. Marx clearly opposed systems of oppression, even if capitalism was historically replacing them. The duty was to fight the current oppression. This whole dilemma, whether the ends justify the means, whether some level of civilizing violence is acceptable for a perceived greater good, it's a tough one that echoes through history. Hey, listener, do you have any other idea or question about this? Please write in comments.
Okay, so we've seen the big theoretical splits on revolution, the state, imperialism. Let's shift gears slightly and look at the practical side. How did they think about actually building the movement day to day?
Right, because regardless of whether you thought the revolution was tomorrow or decades away, you needed organization. You needed to prepare the working class.
And even Bernstein, the reformist, saw value in grassroots organization, right?
Oh, definitely. He really emphasized the importance of trade unions and cooperatives. He called them vital self-help organizations.
Even though they sometimes focused on small issues.
Yeah, he acknowledged they could sometimes be petty and even reactionary in their outlook, maybe focused only on narrow craft interests or immediate wage gains. But he saw a deeper value.
Which was?
He believed that Participating in them, running them, inevitably strengthen the sense of social duty and responsibility among workers. Learning to work together, manage funds, negotiate, make collective decisions.
It was like a training ground.
It's exactly training for future administration. Bernstein didn't think some central committee could just take over and run a complex industrial society after a revolution. You needed capable people at the local level. Running a union or a co-op, in his view, was essential schooling for workers who would eventually help manage a socialist economy.
So the movement itself builds the capacity for the goal.
That's the revisionist logic. But the orthodox camp, while also supporting unions, of course, had another layer to their thinking about preparation. One focused much more on the anticipated moment of crisis.
They were thinking about mass psychology.
Yes, drawing on contemporary sociological and psychological studies, like Sahel's work on crowd behavior, the psychology of public disorder and mass crime. They're trying to understand what actually happens when masses of people take to the streets during a revolution.
What did that analysis show?
Well, one key finding from looking at history of the French Revolution, 1848, was that the masses often act spontaneously, with incredible impetus and rapid resolve. They can initiate things, like storming the Bastille, that even the organized revolutionary leaders didn't plan or expect.
So there's this powerful, unpredictable energy.
Right. But there's a downside. The psychology of the crowd is different from individual psychology. An individual in a crowd becomes more suggestible, more emotional, less capable of independent, rational judgment.
Groupthink, or maybe mob mentality.
Kind of. And the analysis suggested this often leans towards negative emotions. Anger, hatred, destruction. These tend to be expressed more vigorously in a crowd than positive emotions like benevolence. Crowds, CL argued, are often disposed to bad rather than good actions.
That sounds worrying if you're planning a revolution for a better society.
Exactly. If you're anticipating the catastrophe, the sudden collapse of order, you can't just rely on a spontaneous, emotionally volatile mob. That could lead anywhere: chaos, violence, ultimately failure, or even counter-revolution.
So what was the tactical implication for the Orthodox?
Discipline, organization, consciousness. It underlined the absolute necessity for a strong, disciplined, class-conscious party or movement. They needed cadres who could lead, guide, and channel the energy of the masses in a constructive direction.
Keep things focused on the goal.
Right. The source contrasts chaotic uprisings with the disciplined demonstrations of, say, London workers, which remained peaceful because the sounder elements of the populace, organized around clear demands, dominated the streets. The goal was for the conscious, organized part of the working class to lead, preventing the movement from dissolving into unproductive rioting or being hijacked by other elements.
So it connects right back. The revisionists see unions training administrators for a gradual takeover. The Orthodox see the disciplined party as essential to navigating the chaos of the inevitable collapse and actually seizing power effectively.
Precisely. Different views of the future dictated different priorities for organizing in the present. #tag outro.
So we've really traced this fundamental split, haven't we? This crossroads where organized socialism had to choose its path. On one side, Bernstein and the revisionists, adapting to capitalism's resilience, focusing on the gradual movement itself.
Seeing the goal almost embedded within that process of reform, arguing democracy could pave the way.
And on the other, the orthodox Marxists Luxemburg, Trotsky, Becks, holding firm to the idea of an inevitable catastrophe, insisting that reforms were just tactics, temporary gains, and that preparation for the final collapse and the confrontation with the capitalist state was paramount.
Yeah, and stressing that imperialism wasn't just some side issue, but capitalism's essential survival strategy, exporting its violence and contradictions abroad.
At the end of the day, what's the core lesson we can take from revisiting this intense debate?
I think the crucial insight from the orthodox Marxist perspective presented in these sources remains powerful. It's the idea that while capitalism is incredibly adaptive, it uses credit, it expands globally, it forms cartels, it grants reforms when pressured, it can never escape its fundamental contradiction. The relentless drive for profit. And that drive, systemically, requires the constant expansion and intensification of exploitation, whether that's squeezing workers harder at home or violently conquering colonies abroad for resources and cheap labor. That inherent need for expansion and exploitation creates instability, crisis, and violence.
So even if capitalism looks stable sometimes, or seems to be reforming, that underlying dynamic is always there, pushing towards conflict.
That's the argument, that systemic violence, whether economic or military, is why for the orthodox The revolutionary objective of getting rid of the whole system of class rule remained absolutely necessary, not just a desirable option. The timeline might be debatable, as Bernstein showed, but the fundamental nature of this system and the need to replace it wasn't.
It really forces you to think about the relationship between day-to-day struggles for improvement and the ultimate goal of systemic change. Are you trying to manage the existing system better, or are you trying to build the capacity to replace it entirely?
That's the question they were grappling with, and it's a question that still resonates deeply today, isn't it?
Absolutely. It shapes so much of political debate even now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. See you on next episode, comrades. Bye-bye.